we're going to talk about something different. Before you shut your brain down, this ain't your average math and science class, okay? Today, I'm going to show you how you can use math and science, which is things that people often think that it is so far away from us and distant. I'm going to show you how you can use these two items to actually create a difference in a society out there. February 2020. It was when all this thing began. My phone kept getting buzzes about a new virus whose obviously most notorious symptom was respiratory difficulties and pneumonia. Cases were emerging around the country, and Wuhan, a city with more than 10 million population, was placed under lockdown. It was a time that tried man's souls. Back then, we didn't know anything about this virus. We didn't know about its biological mechanisms, we didn't know about transmission pathway, and we didn't even know whether it can spread from persons to persons. We were enclosed by something that is often even more dangerous than known danger itself: uncertainty. Luckily, throughout human history, we have found out ways to mitigate the effect of these uncertainties. And one of the traditional ways we have been doing this is obviously by researching, right? The more we know, the less we fear. But as knowledge in science and math develops, we have figured out new ways to counter the effect of these uncertainties, which is to systematically organize information and use these information to predict what will happen in the future. This art of prediction is known as mathematical modeling. Today, we're going to talk more about this interesting subject of modeling and specifically look at its application in the realm of infectious diseases. This is Tom. Today, Tom doesn't really have anything to do, right? He's just chilling out there. He's on the street talking to girls, doing whatever he does every day. And it was at this moment when he met this very beautiful young lady named Julie. Julie obviously looks very different than Tom because she is a red dot. So Tom's curious, right? He wants to know her name and know why she is red. So he just comes to her. And what happens next is Julie grabs on to Tom and doesn't let go. And Tom could feel this thing that is going on different with his body. And the next thing he knew was Julie let go, and Tom has become red too. Obviously, in this scenario, this redness is something that we define as a spreadable trait, right? Because it spreaded from Julie to Tom. So now let's think about something different. Now let's imagine we have a whole population of Toms and Julie in there, okay? And to make matters worse, this system is moving in a very chaotic and random manner, right? Tom and Julie's move around, bumping into each other, and then Julie will turn Tom into red dots, and then these Toms ends up passing on this trait to other people as well. This thing seems really chaotic and random, that it doesn't really seem like there's a way for us to know anything about it, and not even about what it will happen in the distant future. But we gotta start somewhere, don't we? Now, let's try this. Why don't we count the number of Toms and Julies in this system, and maybe we'll be able to find a pattern in how these quantities of Toms and Julies changes. And luckily, there is a pattern in how this quantity changes. There is this very handy tool in math named differential equations. And different from traditional equations, differential equations doesn't just model the quantity of an object. It models the rate of change of that quantity. And we can construct a system of differential equations for this Tom and Julie system. And all we need to do next is to throw this model some parameters and also give it the initial condition. Okay? Initial condition is important because differential equations feeds off initial condition. And the next thing that we know is that we can have a graph of the number of Toms and Julies in this system over time. It's pretty cool, right? But we're going to take this out of the Tom and Julie scenario because obviously I'm not Tom and you're not Julie, are we? So why don't we try to apply it to something that is more applicable and useful to the real world out there? And in 1927, a guy named Kermot and McKendrick, who were two doctors, thought about the same thing, right? They said, hey, this whole Tom and Julie thing's pretty interesting. So why don't we try to apply it to one of the most prominent spreadable traits out there, which is infectious diseases. And that's what they did. And they ended up building something that became the foundation of mathematical epidemiology today, which is known as the SIR model that divides the population into healthy, infected, and recovered population. And all we have to do now is also to throw this model some parameters and an initial condition, and it will end up giving us a detailed projection of the number of healthy, infected, and recovered individuals in the population over time. This is the power of math, by the way. Now, despite this thing is a huge advancement in math and the knowledge we have about infectious disease and human health science, this is not enough, because let's think about something else. Now, there is this virus that doesn't just create a group of symptomatic individuals, okay? It also creates a group of asymptomatic individuals who transmit the disease at a different rate than these symptomatic individuals. Now, the SIR model is obviously not enough because it's just simply it is not complicated and complex enough. But this model is omnipotent. What we can do with it is that we can add another compartment of asymptomatic individuals who transmit the disease at a different rate than these symptomatic individuals, and then there we have it. This notion of adding model complexity through the notion of addition and subtraction of compartments in the model is known as the notion of competing hazards. My honors and math project was focused on applying the notion of competing hazards to predict the spread of COVID-19 on our very own Culver campus. We built a system with more than 6 transmission compartments that can transmit the disease at a different rate, modeling the effect of CMA, CGA, asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic, and symptomatic individuals in the Culver student body. So we hope that this complex model can give us something that is useful, right? Of course, in order for this model to work, we have a lot of little numbers on there. I don't know if you can see these little numbers. And these little numbers are important because they're parameters that we need to fit so that this model can simulate something that is close to what's going on at Culver with COVID-19. That's what we did. Our parameter fitting process included a study that collected 70 data points on the secondary attack rate of COVID-19. Secondary attack rate is the possibility of infection per contact with an infectious individual. And what we found was that the wearing of a simple mask really decreased this attack rate by a lot in both household and non-household scenario contexts. We also had a study that investigated the contact habit of CMA and CGA students by recruiting 30 student participants from the freshman, sophomore, and junior grade level. And what we found out from this study was that boys tend to make much more contacts on a daily basis than girls. Congratulations, CGA students. So next is the exciting part, right? We have the parameters. We just put them in there and then see what it gives us. Our model outputted a detailed projection on the number of prevalence, quarantine prevalence, cumulative incidence, and incidence of the case counts on Culver campus over time. Notice that we also choose to model the effect of some interventions on the projection of COVID-19 spread. Interventions that we modeled were contact tracing, tactical pause, and the enforcement of dormant barracks mask mandate. If some of these interventions sound familiar, these are the interventions that Culver Academies implemented last November when we had a cluster of cases striking our student body. So in order to model, truly know how effective these interventions are, we defined an intervention coefficient to quantify the effect of these interventions. And what we found was that contact tracing was the most effective intervention, with tactical pause coming in second, and enforcement of dormant barrack mask mandates coming in third. After we compared what our model outputted with the real-life data, we found out that our model projected accurately that maximum incidence of Culver cases will come during the second week after introduction of index case. So the second week would be the time when there will be the most pressure on the Culver healthcare system and the health center quarantine facilities. But the other thing that our model did, disappointingly, is that it significantly overestimated case count. Totally inaccurate. Now, there are many reasons that can account for this inaccuracy, right? But now we're going to focus on one of these reasons that can account for the inaccuracy. And that is, our model did this very interesting thing. So let's say we have this one person who's infected, okay? And in the model, he's waiting to be allocated to either the symptomatic or asymptomatic compartment. Now let's say this individual has a 0.73 chance that he's going to become a asymptomatic individual and a 27% chance that he's going to be asymptomatic. What our model would do is that it would divide this person up into a 0.73 and a 0.27 part. That's not what we want, right? We can't just cut a person in half and say his head will be symptomatic and his body will be asymptomatic. That's not what we want, right? Instead, what we really want is something like this. The flipping of a weighted coin that has 0.73% chance of being a head and the other percent chance of being a tail. So that's what we did. This really opens up the gateway to two prominent notions of modeling. One is deterministic and the other is probabilistic. Deterministic modeling approach is what you just saw, okay? It is a modeling approach that really sacrifices randomness and probabilities to give a detailed projection of something in a system over time. But randomness and random events plays an important role, in fact, in spreading an infectious disease. And that is why we need to make our model a little bit different into developing a probabilistic model, which can take account of the random events effect on the spread of the virus and also handle probabilities better in the model. So we ended up constructing a model that models the distribution of the reproductive numbers of cohort individuals. Reproductive number is a number that equals the average number of secondary infections each infectious individual in the population can generate during his whole time span of infection. So the lower this number is, the better at mitigating the spread, okay? So we constructed a model that is in fact based on many of these coin flips. And by the way, we have a more fancy name for this coin in statistics. It is called a binomial random variable. So next time, when you're trying to settle a problem with your friend by doing heads or tails, come on, don't say flip a coin, right? Say we're going to generate a binomial random variable, sounding much more classy. So our model was also really focused on the relationship between date of exposure and the false negativity rate, because these two items actually have a very intricate relationship in the case of COVID-19. And since our model is focused on this relationship, we decided to model some interventions that really focus on testing of COVID as well. We chose two interventions. One is 2 test sessions per week, which is basically having a person get tested once in 4 days, right? You get tested on Monday, and you get tested on Thursday. The other one is 2 tests per test session. What this means is that you're just going to get tested once a week, which is a relief. But in that test session, you're going to receive 2 PCR tests, and only if both tests come back negative, you'll be released upon the test session and go back to do whatever you're doing, okay? Now I'll leave this to you. Which intervention sounds more reliable? Which one do you think will be more effective at mitigating the spread? And I'll give this graph to you. Oops, spoiler, I'll give this graph to you if this can help you get any educated guesses. Anyone? No? Well, that's fine, because this is why we need our model, right? If this can be something that's just can be calculated to the human mind, then we don't need our computers and everything out there. This is the point of modeling, that we give things that our human mind is unable to process and calculate to the computer so that they can do the work for us. So what our model found was that statistical tests show that both interventions generate a statistically significant difference in the distribution of reproductive numbers, which means that both interventions are not like crap, okay? They do something to the distribution of reproductive numbers. But the intervention of 2 tests per test session is much better at pushing the distribution left than the other intervention, which means that in the intervention of 2 tests per test session, individuals are more likely to have a small reproductive number than in the intervention of 2 test sessions per week. And there we have it, right? And this is why this is important, because if you think about it, both interventions use the same resource. both interventions is having 2 test kits on a student per week. But how we distribute those resources, how we handle out these tests can make such a difference in what they do. And this is why we want to consult these models and stuff before we actually do the thing. We want to make sure that we are optimizing the use of resources instead of just throwing things out there based on ignorance and just hoping that it will do the work for us. Today, we used math to solve a problem in epidemiology and infectious diseases. And in the real world out there, problems are not test quizzes designed to test a specific course concept. In the real world out there, things require you to come up with some creative solutions, and coming up with these creative solutions often mean you have to combine things from different subject areas of study into one. And the requirement for such action had created a new academic discipline known as multidisciplinary studies. Common multidisciplinary studies subjects out there include psychology, social science, and in fact, public health itself is a range of study that really requires multidisciplinary intellectualism, because obviously you have to be knowledgeable in chemistry, biology, computational mathematics, and everything else. And having a multidisciplinary academic background can really help you in your future career development and job interviews and everything like that as well. But being a multidisciplinary person means more than that. So I'm totally fine with it if you didn't get anything from the math and science when we talked about it in speech, right? I'm totally fine with it if you just think everything I've talked about is bullcrap and unreliable. I'm totally fine with it. But I do want you to walk away from this speech with one thing to take away. And that is, don't think of yourself as a person who's really good at visual arts and painting, but just can't do anything with science and engineering. Don't think of yourself as a person who's really good at, science and learning about math, but just can't touch anything that is reading or writing related, okay? In that way, you're just limiting the possibilities of your future. You're thinking about your future in a deterministic way, and we don't want that. We want to think about our future with a stochastic approach. In fact, before I started this study in the beginning of my junior year, I thought that my future career would have something to do with reading and writing, right? I like humanities, and maybe I'll do something with science, but this about the whole math and computer science thing, I just didn't envision this in my life at all. But if I told myself no at that point in time, I would never be able to achieve this whole thing that gave me joy and satisfied my passion. So really, being a multidisciplinary person means that you will see the world with a sense of open-mindedness and really believe that you will be able to achieve every single seemingly insurmountable feat out there, okay? So yeah, being multidisciplinary doesn't just mean that you will be more academically competitive than your peers. It means that you will be finding things out there that can complete you and your passion that you didn't even know about. And if you're more interested in the math covered in this presentation, on the other hand, me and Dr. M are holding a series of workshops that teaches students with some calculus basics and fundamental knowledges into using these knowledges into predicting the spread of COVID-19 at Culver with an even more reliable methodology. So if you're a math student and you want to learn more about this, contact me. That concludes my speech. Thank you very much for listening.